Fasting to break the spirit of carnality and double-mindedness. You adulterers and adulteresses, do you know that the friendship with the world is enmity with Yahuwah? Wherefore, therefore, will be a friend of the world is the enemy of Yahuwah. Jacob 4:4. Double-mindedness breeds worldliness and carnality. The rejection spirit weds a person to the world for love. It is simple Satan's substitute for true love. Worldliness can be seen in teenage rebellion. Teenagers will often get involved in a lifestyle of lust, perversion, drugs, etc. Parents are often at their wits' end. Signs of double-mindedness can be seen in piercings, tattoos, punk dressing, goth dressing, provocative clothing, drug addiction, smoking, running away, fighting, gang activity, profanity, disrespect to authority, alternate lifestyle, depression, suicidal tendencies, and withdrawal. For a generation now, disruptive young Americans who rebel against authority figures have been increasingly diagnosed with mental illnesses and medicated with psychiatric, psychotropic drugs. Disruptive young people who are medicated with Ritalin, Adderall, and other amphetamines routinely report that these drugs make them care less about their boredom, resentments, and other negative emotions, thus making them more compliant and manageable. And so-called atypical antipsychotics such as resveratrol, Zyprexa, powerful tranquilizing drugs, are increasingly prescribed to disruptive young Americans, even though in most cases they are not displaying any psychotic symptoms. Teenage double-mindedness has become an epidemic. Most don't know what they are dealing with. Yahuwah's solution is deliverance and healing. Double-mindedness has also been called passive-aggressive, but it is simply rejection and rebellion. Fasting breaks the powers of carnality, division, and strife. Whose end is destruction? Whose alua is their belly, and whose kabod is in their shame, who mind earthly things. Philippians 3:19. Carnality is a problem in many families in the body of Yahusha. To be carnal means to be fleshly. It means to mind earthly things. Carnality refers back to being ruled by our fleshly appetites, as I discussed in chapter 16. We should not be controlled by the belly. Fasting takes the power away from the belly and strengthens the ruach. To be carnally minded is death. To be spiritually minded is life and shalom. Romans 8:6. Carnality causes division and strife. 1 Corinthians 3:13. Carnality hinders believers from growing and coming into maturity. Carnality prevents believers from understanding the deeper truths of the scriptures. Fasting helps believers focus on spiritual things. Fasting breaks us free from the power of the flesh. Fasting increases spiritual discernment. 1 Corinthians 2:15. Breaking the power of double-mindedness. I bind and rebuke every spirit that would attempt to distort, disturb, or disintegrate the development of my personality in the name and authority of Yahushua HaMashiach. I break all curses of schizophrenia and double-mindedness on my family in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and rebuke the spirit of double-mindedness in the name and authority of Yahushua HaMashiach. Jacob 1:8. I bind and take authority over the strong man of rejection and rebellion and separate them in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and cast out the ruach koth of rejection, the ruach koth of fear of rejection, and the ruach koth of self-rejection in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and cast out all spirits of lust, fantasy lust, harlotry, and perverseness in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and cast out all spirits of insecurity and inferiority in the name of Yahushua. I bind and cast out all ruach koth of self-accusation and compulsive confession in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and cast out all ruach koth of fear of judgment, self-pity, false compassion, and false responsibility in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and cast out all ruach koth of depression, despondency, despair, discouragement, and hopelessness in the name and authority of Yahushua. I bind and cast out all ruach koth of guilt, condemnation, unworthiness, and shame in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all Ruach oaths of perfection, pride, vanity, ego, intolerance, frustration, and impatience in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all Ruach oaths of unfairness, withdrawal, pouting, unreality, fantasy, daydreaming, and vivid imagination in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all the spirits of self-awareness, timidity, and loneliness and sensitivity in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all spirits of talkativeness, nervousness, tension, and fear in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all Ruach oath of self-will, selfishness, and stubbornness in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out the spirit of accusation in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all spirits of self-delusion and self-deception and self-seduction in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all Ruach oath of judgment, pride, and unteachableness in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all Ruach oath of control and possessiveness in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out the root of bitterness in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out all Ruach of hatred, resentment, violence, murder, unforgiveness, anger, and retaliation in the name and authority of Yahusha. I bind and cast out the Ruach of paranoia, suspicion, distress, persecution, confrontation, and fear in the name and authority of Yahusha. That all of these renunciations and denunciations and bindings be made manifest in the name and authority of Yahushua HaMashiach. It is done. So be it. Hallelujah. Hallelujah and hallelujah. Selah.